Bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum.
I'm Allie.
And I'm Gaby. And we're real-life sober BFFs exploring spirituality,
Social issues,
all things sobriety,
and staying present in a world full of distractions.
Come join us on this journey.
We've been waiting for you.
Bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum.
Just a quick disclaimer that today's episode will cover some topics that are not suitable for work, so make sure the kids aren't around and pop in some headphones if you're in the office. Let's get started. All right, hello and welcome to my solo episode. This is Gaby, aka Gabrielle. Despite my best efforts, people still just call me Gaby, so that's what I'll be going by for this podcast. I was born in Northern California. My mom was in the military, as was my dad. They met at a party, and I was their party favor. I lived with my mom when I was little. We moved, so I was born in California, and she brought me home to Missouri without telling my grandparents that I was biracial. But my grandparents accepted me, which she did not expect, and that was good for me. Because there was a little bit of struggle. My mom struggled with substance abuse and addiction as well. And so my early childhood was not really a childhood per se. So by the time I was like 4, my earliest memories were taking care of my younger brother and sister. One of my most prominent memories from my childhood is my mom leaving and telling me to take care of my brother and sister, and I was 3 or 4 at the time, and my little brother got a knife and was like running around the house, and I didn't know what to do, so the only phone number that I knew by heart was my grandparents' phone number, and I called them, and I don't remember if my mom showed up while I was on the phone or if they called back, but I ended up getting in trouble because my mom didn't want them to know that she had left us home alone. So anyways, that's one of my earliest memories is my mom leaving. I didn't know why she was leaving at that point, but to go use, and then me being left in charge of my younger siblings. I also was subjected to sexual assault when I was very young at a day camp, and I am very grateful that my mom was very proactive about that, and we did go to the police and pursue legal action, but the gentleman that did the action was from a prominent family and did not face any consequences for what he did. So that was like my earliest parts of my formative years, right? So before I was 7. So when I was almost 5 years old, I went to go live with my grandparents. My mom lost custody of us, or she gave us over. That's actually something that right now I'm doing some inner child work and going back to my childhood. So I'll be having a lot of discussions with my mom about my early childhood and the little missing pieces that I don't remember or might have blocked out. But I went to live with my grandparents, and I was enrolled in private school. My grandparents were very religious, so my memories of being young and being with my grandparents included a lot of time in church. I went to a private Christian school, so a lot of God and a lot of church. I think we went to church every Sunday morning and evening and every Wednesday night, and quite often on Saturdays we would be doing something at the church, like knocking on doors, or something with the church, I should say. Sometimes those things weren't actually at the church, but like knocking on doors and inviting people to come to the church with us and things like that. And I do remember, even when I was very young, questioning some of the things that we learned, like in the Bible, and not having it fully resonate with me as being like like anytime I asked questions, I was kind of being told that I was being like led astray, or like the devil was involved or something, and that I just needed to have faith and just trust and not ask questions, right? So that was really confusing for me, because it didn't feel right. And I've learned as I was older that was probably just my intuition and my strong connection that I have with the spiritual world and with spirituality in general that made me feel that way when I was really young. That I didn't have to fit into some little box to have this connection with God or the universe or whatever you want to call it. So then I lived with my grandparents until I was about 13. Right before I ended up moving back in with my mother, well, it wasn't right before, it was a couple years before. So in 4th grade, I got into some trouble and I was expelled from school, and from the Christian school. And when I was expelled, my grandfather had like lost his job recently. He was like laid off or something. So we ended up, myself, my brother, and my sister, we ended up being homeschooled. And so I was homeschooled from 4th grade, the end of 4th grade, until almost the end of my 8th grade year. So I went back to live with my mom in 8th grade, and between the 4th grade and the 8th grade year, again, there was just a lot of church. I went to church camp like every year, and that was like super fun. I had a lot of fun at church camp, but again, I had a lot of questions and a lot of doubts surrounding the things that we were being taught and told to just follow without question, and without, I don't know. I just really had questions that weren't getting answered, and I was kind of told that I was like wrong for questioning. So yeah, that was frustrating. So I moved back in with my mom, and I started going to public school, which was a huge shock. Like for anybody who grew up, like, I don't know if you were ever homeschooled or you went to church all the time when you were younger. If you weren't ever exposed to like public school or just the world in general, it's like culture shock. So I got thrown into public school the last quarter of my 8th grade year. So about to go start high school. And I was also an early school starter, I guess you would call it. I don't know. I started kindergarten when I was 4 because my birthday's in September. So I was just a little bit younger than everybody else in my grade already. So there were a lot of things going on that were a lot different than what I was used to. So I started going to public school. I met a lot of really fun people, but I also discovered pretty early on that I could like get away with a lot, because I don't know if my mom felt guilty for the years that she didn't have with us and didn't want to like discipline us as much, or if she just wasn't as present because she wasn't used to having kids. By this time she had 3 more, so there were 6 of us all together. 2 of them lived with their dad, so at this point there were 4 of us in my mom's house, 4 kids, and the other 2 were with their dad. But I could get away with like so much, and going from being in a really strict religious household to being like I had the ability to do whatever I wanted to do, like pretty much whenever I wanted to do it. It was like hit or miss on when my mom would decide that she wanted to do mom things and like tell me no, right? So I started smoking cigarettes, and I remember like at first my mom was like, "What are you doing? Don't do that." And then she tried to do the opposite of like, if you're going to smoke, then you're going to smoke all of these cigarettes or something. So she like made me smoke. And then it was like, no, you're not going to smoke. And then I was just like, well, I'm going to smoke anyways. And so then she would buy me cigarettes. So I started smoking when I was 13. And there was a time when my sister came over to visit us at my mom's house, because the two siblings that went to live with their dad were the brother and sister that I grew up with, that I took care of. They were like my babies. They were, I was always their protector. I was always there for them. So it was a little bit hard for me to be separated from them when I moved in with my mom. I remember she came over, and my parents, like my mom and my stepdad, always had alcohol in the house. And My sister was like, so I was 13, so she was like 11, and she was like, let's drink this. And I was like, what? And we got like a couple little airplane bottles that I think my stepdad had like hidden somewhere, and we drank them. And that was the first time that I drank alcohol that like I got a buzz. Before that, like I had tasted alcohol, like tasted beer or something. I remember when I was kind of younger, we went on a trip with my stepdad, and he had beer, and we tasted it. So I didn't like it then, obviously. I thought it was disgusting because most kids probably don't like the taste of beer. But that was my first experience at 13 with my 11-year-old little sister drinking. From then, like, I started hanging out with different people from school, my next door neighbor, and I thought she was like the coolest. She was like 2 years older than me, so I was like a freshman and she was like a junior. Maybe she was a sophomore. I don't know. It doesn't matter. She drove and she was a little bit older than me, and I thought that she was amazing. Well, she smoked weed, and so she offered it to me, and I was like, well, she's really cool and she's smoking weed, so like I'm totally gonna smoke this with her too. And so I smoked weed, and I was like 13 or 14. And that was the beginning of my experiences with different, I guess, substances that were illegal for me at the time, right? So I continued to smoke, and I found that I really, really enjoyed alcohol. I didn't so much enjoy weed, but I would smoke it because other people were doing it, and it was just something to do. And I found that I really enjoyed escaping my reality. I lived in a house with little kids, like these, we actually called my 3 younger siblings the little kids, and they were much younger. So there was a huge gap. Like, I think my brother's like 9 years younger than me, so it was like 9, 10, and 11 years younger. So I was like often the babysitter. I was often stuck taking care of the household while my parents were working. And my mom was still struggling with substance abuse at this time. So there were times that she would disappear for a couple days, and we wouldn't know where she was or if she was okay. And during those times, I would just naturally fall back into my role as taking care of my younger siblings that were there at the time. So I found that it was like really easy for me to turn to alcohol or weed or whatever was available for me to escape my reality. When I was 15, we moved from our home and from the first public school I went to where I had made friends and felt like I had a nice community of people. We moved to a trailer park. Dun, dun, dun. I was devastated. Not only was I moving schools and leaving all of my friends, I was moving into a trailer, and I thought that was the end of my world. I was like, I can't believe we're doing this. I think I even yelled at my parents. I don't remember, but I was like so upset, and I remember crying like so much when we first moved there. But shortly after, one of my friends from my old school had come over to hang out, and I guess she knew one of the guys that lived in the neighborhood. Like, she was talking to him or something. I don't know. She had a car, whatever. We ended up hanging out, and I quickly fell into hanging out with these people. Like, the first couple times we hung out, I don't think I even really talked to anybody, but everybody was smoking weed and drinking, and so I knew how to do that. That was an easy way for me to connect. So I just went ahead and drank with them and smoked with them, and then started to develop friendships with the people that were in this neighborhood, the kids in the neighborhood. So that became something that was just really routine. My best friend Casey at the time, when we were like 15 and 16 years old, like summer break, we spent an entire summer mowing grasses every morning, like going around the neighborhood, like to mow lawns and knocking on doors to make like $20. We would mow like 1 yard a day and make like $20, and then use that to go buy a fifth of vodka and cigarettes, because we knew that the gas station by our neighborhood would sell to us, because I don't know, they were kind of creepy and liked young girls. I don't know, whatever. But we knew that we could go and get cigarettes and alcohol. and we drank the nastiest vodka every single day. And being young, we did not experience hangovers. So we were up bright and early the next morning, ready to go and get another $20 so we could get 2 packs of cigarettes and a fifth of vodka and get drunk every night. And we did that the entire summer. That ended up expanding my friend circle, I guess. We started hanging out with more and more kids from the neighborhood, and kids from outside the neighborhood would come hang out with us. And that's just what we did. We drank, we smoked, we partied, and we did it on repeat. So I did that for a while. When I was 16, I ended up starting to date an older guy in my neighborhood, and my mom and I ended up having a really rough time living together. I don't know if there was a clash between us because I kind of took on a mom role, or felt like she couldn't tell me what to do because she wasn't ever really there. But I kind of just did whatever the fuck I wanted to do. I would sneak out of the window whenever I wanted to go if she tried to tell me no. I would sometimes even just walk out the front door and leave. Like, I didn't care. I did whatever I wanted, and she couldn't tell me anything. And on the occasions that I wasn't out doing whatever I wanted to do, there were again these instances where my mom would leave and disappear and be using, and I would get so pissed because I would have to break my cycle of using to be available to take care of my younger siblings. And about this time too, when I was about 15 or 16, I stopped going to church because I just got tired of listening to someone tell me all of these things and me having questions and not getting answers and not feeling like a connection to what I was being taught, and not feeling like I was getting the fulfillment that I should have been feeling or getting in the spiritual sense that I knew should be available to me. So at that point, I just... I was dating that older guy in my neighborhood, and I moved out. I left my mom's house. At first, when I left, my mom and I had gotten into a fight, and the cops got called, and it just didn't end well. So I ended up coming back, and then I wanted to leave, and I slept in a car for a couple days. Well, she reported me as a runaway, and I ended up coming back home because I knew the police were going to come find me because I wasn't 17 yet, and in the state of Missouri, you can't leave your house until you're 17 or whatever. And in the midst of all of this, at some point when I was at home, I had left a little bit of weed in the trailer, right? And so in the middle of all of this, the runaway situation and my mom and I just fighting constantly, she ended up asking me if I wanted to go to my grandparents' house. And I'm like, okay, fine, let's go. And we get there, and she has collected and saved this little bag of weed that I had. And she calls the police on me from my grandparents' house and has me arrested for drug possession or whatever. It was a small amount, so it wasn't some kind of crazy felony or something. But I got arrested when I was 16 for a joint's worth of weed from my grandparents' house. I had to go do drug classes, and it was horrible, but it didn't make me want to stop smoking weed or drinking or anything. It just pissed me off. So as soon as I could, I ended up talking with the guy I was dating, and I moved into his house. Told my mom I'm going to live with him and his mom, by the way, weird. I'm going to live with them, and I'm not coming home. I'm not. And I was still going to school at the time. I remember being really frustrated when I would be sick or something, and I would have to call the school and be like, I'm not coming to school. And they'd be like, well, your mom needs to call. I'm like, well, I don't live with my mom, but sure, let me see if she'll do that for me, which she probably won't. So that was, I don't know. That was just more of me running away and just trying to escape the reality that I was living in. I didn't like to live with my mom, so I went and found a new place to live. And I never stopped drinking. I would go to school hungover as hell, because at some point I would develop hangovers, or maybe I just didn't go to bed early enough to not be hungover. I might still be drunk when I showed up to school the next day, right? I was prescribed Adderall. I guess I skipped that part of my story when I was younger, but I was diagnosed with ADD when I was in second grade or something. So they started giving us prescription medication. When I moved in with my mom when I was 13, I stopped taking it. I was diagnosed with depression at 13 as well and given medication that made me like throw up and have like tics. So I just stopped taking that as well. So when I was, right before I moved out of my mom's house, somehow we had gotten prescriptions of Adderall. I don't know if it was so my mom could use it or what, but my little sister, again, had like gotten a hold of the Adderall and told me like, you can crush it up and you can like snort it. So I ended up taking my Adderall with me when I left, and along with being hungover or whatever, when I would go back to school, I would crush up my Adderall and keep it inside of a compact, and I would snort Adderall through my school day. Like, the inside of my nose was orange or blue for like 2 years. I couldn't sneeze or blow my nose and not have some kind of color come out. And as soon as I started snorting Adderall, I loved everything about it and started snorting whatever I could up my nose. So 16, 17, some of my other friends started doing harder drugs like cocaine and meth, and I was like, oh, I can snort it up my nose, let's do it. So I started snorting whatever I could up my nose when I was 16, 17 years old. And I was still going to school at this time, so it was not uncommon for me to be using while I was at school or whatever. I ended up dropping out briefly my end of my junior year of high school just for one semester, and I applied to go to the alternative school that was part of my school. And so I was accepted, and I went there, and I did really well, no problems. But again, I was still, being at that school, I just had more access to other kids who were going through struggles and challenges, who were also turning to different substances to cope with what they were dealing with. And it just gave me more connections. So I just continued to use and do whatever. I think at this point now, I'd smoked crack. I had pretty much done everything. But like the biggest thing that kept me from maybe just giving myself completely over to all these substances was that I was so scared of becoming my mom or people being able to say that I was my mom that I would not let myself just become completely lost to what I was using. Even though I wanted to escape and I wanted to be lost and I wanted to feel like I was completely disconnected, I did not let myself just be completely gone because I wanted to make sure that nobody could ever use that against me. So I ended up graduating high school a semester late. I also didn't want to drop out because I didn't want anybody to be able to say that I didn't finish school. So I finished school and just continued for years just using whatever I could. At one point I ended up turning to ecstasy, and that was like my drug of choice forever because I just felt so good while I was using it. And there was a time where I didn't sleep for I don't know how long because I would just keep popping pills, like one right after the other. Anytime I felt like I was starting to come down, I would take more. And that was definitely not good. I do worry about like what's going on with my brain. Like sometimes I can't remember words or remember what I'm doing, and I'm sure that could be attributed to my use of MDMA or whatever else was mixed with it. So I never stopped drinking. I never stopped finding things to keep me from having to fully face all of the shit that I dealt with growing up, all of the shit that I didn't want to think about, just all of the hurt maybe too that had built up from feeling like I didn't have somebody there for me. I should mention too that I didn't meet my biological father till I was 17 years old, and I struggled with not knowing who my dad was for years, feeling like he didn't want me or like he didn't try to know me or care who I was or care how I was doing, and that was a big struggle for me. is a huge challenge. So it was just really easy for me to use. So let's fast forward a little bit, because really all I did was just get drunk for like 6 years between there. And we'll move forward to the year that kind of started the change in my life, 2009. In 2009, at this point, I again was drinking all the time. I started using some other drugs. I found that I wanted a way to make easy money, right? So I thought about selling weed, but I'm like really bad with math and numbers, and like weighing stuff just sounded like way more work than it was worth for the return. And also, like, weed smells. Like, I didn't want to have anything that was like so obvious on my person at any time. So I was living with somebody who was selling heroin, and I ended up hanging out with him, and he taught me how to sell drugs. And then I ended up selling ecstasy. And at some point, I stopped. I kind of tried to stop doing that and do something better. And so I became, the reason I stopped was I became the guardian of a young kid. And so I tried to do something better. And I met this kid and this kid's family through all of the drug stuff, right? So I knew this kid like needed to be away from that. So I tried to move away from there. So that was kind of my, all right, I'm going to not do this anymore, whatever. An old friend, someone I had been friends with since I was 13 years old, ended up reaching out to me. We had been hanging out that summer with some of my other roommates at the time, and like painting houses and stuff. He had experience doing that. So like we had reconnected, and he was one of the people that I had first met and became friends with when I started going to public school. So we had like a long history. So we'd been friends for, let's see, it's 2009. So I don't know, since I was 13 at that point, I was like 24. So over 10 years, right? So, he reaches out to me and he wants to get some ecstasy or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not really doing that anymore. And then he like made me a deal that I just couldn't say no to, which I should have known. Deal is too good to be true. But you know what? I truly believe that everything happens and comes into our lives for a reason. And there was a huge reason why this happened for me. So I ended up contacting one of my old friends and asking them if they could get me whatever he needed. So got it, met up with him, gave him what he wanted. He came with another person. And we ended up leaving after all that happened. And he kept trying to see when we would be back. And he had also been talking to one of my friends at the time. So they were seeing each other, not romantically, but you know what I mean. And so he was trying to meet up with her, or at least that's what he made it out to seem. So when we got back to the house, we told him, like, hey, we're going to be back around this time, whatever, if you want to come by and see her. And about an hour after we got back to the house, the doors of the front and back of my house come open, because we never locked the doors. People just came and went from my house as they wanted to. It was kind of a party house. And several gentlemen walk in with guns pointed at all the people that were in my house and told us all to get on the floor. As you could probably imagine at this point, my door was getting kicked in for selling drugs. I didn't know at that time what was happening. So apparently my friend had come over to the house with an undercover police officer. And so this one act, after I had decided I wasn't going to be doing it anymore, I think about all the times I was doing stupid shit and like didn't get caught, but this one time that I wasn't even really doing anything anymore at this point, I just made this really stupid decision to do this. After I was trying to get out of all of that, I ended up having the door kicked in, right? And again, I believe everything happens for us. At that moment, I was completely devastated. I didn't know what was going to happen. Everything worked out in a way that they didn't have any evidence of anything happening. So I didn't get in any trouble at all. Or somebody else said something. I don't know. It's questionable, but it's not my business anymore. So all I know is that I did not get in trouble. But it scared me. It scared me enough that I pretty much had a nervous breakdown. I ended up leaving my house and like going to stay at my sister's house for several days. I could not keep myself from like crying and shaking and thinking that like at any moment I was going to prison for the rest of my life. And I considered like killing myself because I didn't know. I was like, there's no way I can do prison. Like it's not gonna happen. I won't survive. Like it was rough. So all of that happened, and shortly after that, I mean, I ended up going back to my house. I ended up just falling back into old patterns of drinking. Obviously, I was not dabbling in selling drugs anymore. I was way too scared to do that ever again. But I did continue to drink, and I did continue to use drugs if they were available to me. If somebody had something on their person and they were like, hey, you want to do this? I was like, F yeah. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, let's do it, right? So, I tried everything and anything that I could get my hands on. And in 2010, I started working at a restaurant. This is where Allie and I met. This restaurant, actually, it's interesting how I ended up working there. So everybody in my house applied to work at this restaurant, and they only called back people who had like so many years of experience. And I only had like, at this time, like a year of serving experience from working at a place called Macaroni Grill, where I met some of my closest friends to this day back in like 2007. But again, we all just drank and partied together, and several of us are now sober together too, which is amazing. But 2010, like I didn't have enough serving experience, so I wasn't supposed to be able to work at this restaurant. They never called me back, even though they called back some of the roommates. And I was like, they said, all we got were like phone calls saying, just call us back and we'll get you started or something. And so I was like, well, I'm just gonna pretend that they called me, and I'm gonna like call them and be like, hey, I missed your call. I'm gonna be there for orientation. When is it? And these people fucking bought it, and they gave me the job, and they told me when to come in for onboarding, and like I showed up and nobody told me to leave, so I started working there. And I met Allie my first day working there. She just had this big personality, a big voice, and we asked her to sit at our table. We all ended up, a bunch of us from that orientation ended up going back to my house and drinking and like playing drinking games, and that just sort of became the norm. So we added all these new people into our normal habits of like drinking every day, partying every night, whatever. And I'm not going to say that those weren't great times. I had so much fun, even though anytime I was alone, I definitely struggled with having to think about things. So I think that I really enjoyed that environment too, because there was not very much alone time. There were like 10 of us living in a 2-bedroom house, and I'm not joking. So there were very few opportunities for alone time in that house. And I loved it, but I don't know how healthy it was for I don't know. I think people that struggle with different things and different challenges just kind of naturally gravitate toward each other, or maybe that's just been my experience, that I've found these other people who were all just a little bit broken, and we're all able to find a sense of community and family with each other, right? So working at this restaurant, we just fell into this habits of drinking, and the restaurant didn't care if we drank at work. So we would, every night, every time we all got off work, we'd all get plastered at work and then drive back to the house or drive to the next place and just keep drinking after the bar closed at work. I ended up meeting my ex-husband while I worked at this restaurant, and like, needless to say, I don't think I ever hung out with him sober. And shortly, within a year of us being together, I became pregnant. And so pregnancy freaked me the F out. Like, I was so nervous about being, like, I didn't feel like I had a great example of a mother, aside from, like, my grandmother who raised me. But my mother, I was so scared that I would be like my mom with my kid or something. And so I immediately stopped drinking. I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, I moved out of the house, and I tried to get as, like, well as I could for this life that I was going to be growing. And I was so scared and so nervous of like anything. So I followed all those pregnancy things, like don't eat lunch meat and like don't eat sushi and make sure that you like don't drink that much caffeine and like all this other shit. And I never even did like, they say you can have like a glass of wine or something. Like I didn't even touch alcohol. I didn't smoke cigarettes. I did nothing. I made sure that I followed like whatever I thought would be the most healthy way for me to take care of this baby that was growing inside me. And during this time when I had my first, I guess, stint with sobriety, it wasn't like I wanted to be sober. I thought about drinking all the time, and I thought about smoking all the time, and I could not wait till I was not pregnant so I could drink. I was like counting down the days because I hated being present. And I also discovered that I was kind of a miserable bitch. I was sober and like could not stand being like around myself, let alone this man I ended up marrying. After I found out I was pregnant, we got married shortly after, because I was pregnant, and again, like had all these crazy things, like I don't want my kid to not have a family and not have a father and blah, blah, blah. So like I have to get married and, whatever. So I married my ex-husband, and I hated being around him. I hated being around myself. I was just mean and miserable and horrible. And we had our own struggles because he was drinking a lot, even though like he had his own business. He wasn't making a whole lot of money. So while I'm completely sober and dealing with life on life's terms for like the first time in my entire adult life, I'm pregnant too. So I have all these hormones. I'm like also like hustling and struggling, trying to make sure that we're paying all of our bills. And I was so frustrated. It just added to how miserable I was. So then I have my baby, and like he's awesome. He's the best thing in the world. We had a couple struggles in the beginning. Like he was an emergency C-section, and breastfeeding was terrible for the first 2 weeks while I tried to figure it out. But I had my baby, and then I went through this period of like looking back on it. I definitely had postpartum depression, but I didn't know that in that time. I was just so overwhelmed, and so I just shut down everything else except for taking care of my baby. That was like all I could focus on. So my house was a wreck. My person was a wreck. I don't think I showered for like weeks. I don't even know. I don't remember, but I remember my house being so messy, and that was one of the things that was a problem when I was younger in my mom's house. Like my brothers and sisters, when I was like living with my boyfriend, actually got removed from the home at some point for the house being a mess. And that was probably a symptom of my mom's addiction and her struggles, and what she was feeling inside was projecting itself out into her environment. But at some point my house started to look like this because I just couldn't take care of it. The only thing I could do was take care of my baby. And that's what I did as best I could in that time. So we moved to a house out in like Troy, Missouri, which was really far away from like everybody, far away from my family. And I ended up being able, so I've always had this uncanny ability to like connect with people when it comes to getting jobs. So like if you put me in a situation where I have a job interview, I'm going to fucking ace that interview. I don't care if it's a job I've never done in my entire life. I will bullshit my way through it and make you think that I am so capable of doing this job that you won't want to even think about hiring anybody else. So I ended up getting a job working for a really awesome health organization in St. Louis. And I was going to be making more money than I've ever made in my entire life, like times 2, right? So I am like, okay, I'm so done with this marriage. I'm so done feeling like I'm doing everything to take care of this house, and I'm not getting the support that I feel like I need. And I'm gonna leave. So, and some things happen with my husband that I'm not gonna put his business out there because this is my story. That ended up being the final straw for me to be like, all right, this is it. So I went and found an apartment in St. Louis. I told him I was leaving, and within like a month, I had moved from Troy, Missouri to St. Louis, Missouri with my son, and told my husband, this is how we're going to do the child arrangements, This is how we're going to do the arrangements, and this is when you're going to see him, and blah, blah, blah. And when I moved right next door to one of my best friends from the old party house. And I immediately fell right back into my drinking habits. I had access to my old friend network. I had access to somebody who would enable me and make me feel like it was okay for me to drink and party all the time, even with my kid in the house. And I just started getting shit-faced all the time, like every day again. Working this new job, I would go in there hungover. I actually got to the point where I was so hungover, I would be puking at work the next morning and be like, oh, I'm just sick. Like, it was so terrible. Like, I'm glad that my son was hopefully so young, because he was like a year and a half, that he won't remember that part of his life, because I was constantly... He was just constantly exposed to people who were drinking, and I hope that it also doesn't affect or impact his views on alcohol in the future. I don't know. That's something that I'll have to work on with him and with myself. But that was just a time where I just started drinking again, no problem. And I didn't stop. I ended up starting to date my husband now. And he also enjoyed partying, so it was easy. Like, we could all, him, my best friend, me, we could all drink together and no problem. And at some point, shortly after we started dating and shortly after I had started this job, Allie ended up moving to Chicago, and she had mentioned something about, like, me going with her. And I was like, yeah, fuck St. Louis, let's go to Chicago. I don't want to live in this hellhole anyways, like, let's do this. I looked for a job, and I found a job within like 2 weeks, and we planned on this move and made it happen within like 2 months. So by the end of like 2014, we moved to Chicago. And me and Allie and my now husband and our kids all lived in an apartment together. And the drinking continued, but I had started like maybe slowing down on my drinking a little bit. It wasn't as much of a priority to me to drink every day, maybe, but I would still, if I did drink, I definitely drank so much that I would usually end up blacking out. And so the drinking, though, in the house continued in a way that like would just make me angry. And I think it was a little bit of jealousy and a little bit of like, I'm not getting the attention that I want, and so it just pissed me off, and I was like, all right, well, we're moving out of this house, because my husband found a drinking partner in my friend, and like, I would be like, well, why aren't you guys hanging out with me, or whatever. However that worked out, it just pissed me off, and so I was like, we're leaving. So we ended up moving out. We lived in Chicago for a little bit longer, and I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter. And again, the same way I did before, I quit drinking, I quit smoking, I quit everything cold turkey. And mind you, at this point, like, I'm still a miserable person. I still hate myself. I am not super happy with my life. I've never dealt with any of the things that I went through growing up. And I've never had to experience life, you know, really sober and present and wanting to actively participate in my life, aside from the time that like I was pregnant with my son, which I still didn't want to actively participate in any of it. I was just doing it to make sure that my kid was okay. So pregnant with my daughter, and had some complications with her. I had a lot of bleeding and things were happening. And so we freaked out a little bit, and I was like, Kevin, like, we got to move back to St. Louis in case something happens. Like, we need to be there. So, and I also at this point enrolled in a program to be a chiropractor. And my school was back in St. Louis, so it was just going to be easier all around long term to be back in St. Louis, even though I didn't want to come back there. I at this point, like, just had this immense hatred for St. Louis, and just St. Louis is such a unique place. It just kind of, there's like a dark cloud or something that hangs over the city that just needs to be lifted, and so many people need healing. So I think I felt that. And in all of this, there were a couple times that I remember, like, feeling like I wanted to find some kind of spiritual connection or spirituality or go back to church or something. I was like longing for this connection. And I remember joking with my best friend and being like, I'm going to sell all my shit and go to Brazil and like hang out with the shaman for like a month or something. And he would just like laugh at me and be like, okay, you're crazy. Like, you're never going to do that. Turns out I'm totally going to do it. But I would be like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And he just like would laugh at me. But I was missing something. I knew that there was something that I needed. And part of that was just coming to terms with all the things that I'd experienced in my life and being present and aware. But it wasn't something that I wanted to do. So we had moved back to St. Louis. I had Lincoln, and I had, mostly like the birth of my dreams, which was awesome. And she's a cool kid, even though she was like so hard to deal with when she was really, really little. She was like colicky, and we had a lot of breastfeeding issues, and I did have a little touch of depression, but it wasn't as bad as when it was with Victor. I think part of that might have been having a little bit more support from my partner, but definitely was a little easier after that. But I still like loved to drink. It was anytime I was frustrated or angry or sad or happy or whatever, any emotion that came up, rather than experiencing that emotion, it was a time to drink. And in my friend circle, it was so normalized to just drink for every occasion. Anytime we were all together, it was around alcohol. That it just never felt like it was a problem for me, even when I would be sitting there like, why am I doing this to myself again? Or I'd wake up with a hangover, like, why did I do that? And just feel guilty and terrible. I still did it because I didn't want to be present. So in February 2018, after struggling with my weight for a long time, that was another thing that I didn't like being in my own body. I decided to have weight loss surgery. And again, I think everything happens for a reason. I had yo-yoed many times, losing 50, 60 pounds, gaining it all back, gaining back a little more maybe. But every time I wasn't successful in maintaining weight loss, and something I had struggled with since I was a kid, like from the time that I started going through puberty, I just would put on weight. So I had weight loss surgery, and once I started losing weight, I found that some of the things that maybe I was using to like drinking maybe for social anxiety and things like that, some of the things that I felt like I needed to hide from, or maybe if I was focusing on being miserable in my own body, I no longer had that to worry about. I was no longer thinking about losing weight or thinking about dieting or thinking about how I would look if I was going to hang out with people or whatever. And it gave me more of an opportunity to focus on other things like my mind and my mental well-being and stability. And so I started really looking into like personal development and things like that and ways that I could work on myself. And I'm not going to say I didn't do that before. Like I kind of had delved into different things before because I was always kind of looking for something to make me feel good, to make me feel happy. That's why I wanted to feel good. I wanted to feel happy, and I wanted to feel like I didn't have to deal with anything. Little did I know that being present and being open to connection was going to be the solution to my issue of feeling so miserable. But after having the weight loss surgery and shedding, again, also we hold on to a lot of hormones in our fat. So a lot of the hurt and the things that maybe had put things into my body that I was holding on to, I was able to shed and release. So I found that I wanted to do things a little bit better and do things a little bit differently. But then the summer of 2018, after I had lost a little bit of weight and felt a little bit more confident, I started going out a lot. I started drinking again because I felt really confident. So I kind of left behind all of this, like, I want to be better stuff. Mind you, during like my period of just after my weight loss surgery, when I decided like, I'm totally going to do all this great stuff. And I had decided I wanted to, I had been pursuing being a doula, and I had gotten my lactation counselor certification. And I had planned a trip to India that fall to go and study yoga. I kind of left all of that for a minute. And over the summer of 2018, I went right back into old drinking habits. And at this point, I was leaving both my kids at home to go out and drink and like not come home and do other things that just weren't weren't great. Like, were so super damaging to my relationship, super damaging to myself. And I just did this for several months. But I hadn't completely figured out how to get in touch with myself, or maybe I was just skimming the surface of the things that I needed to work on within myself. And because I just barely did any work and didn't get results right away, I just went right back into old habits because I was miserable. I was fucking miserable. Like, and I was just a horrible person. I don't even know how I had friends, honestly, because I would not have wanted to be my friend. So by the end of the summer, I'm still kind of in these habits, but I'm going to India for a month, right? And like, I'm doing a yoga program. We're going to a city that's like completely dry. There's no alcohol that's going to be allowed there, so I can't sit and get shit-faced every day, even if I wanted to. So I don't have access to alcohol. And like, by the way, a lot of people that get weight loss surgery, they kind of have a transfer addiction. So if they previously were using food as like a comfort or something, which, I mean, I was using anything I could get my hands on, food, alcohol, drugs, whatever. They will often find something else to be like, to have an addiction to. So they're transferring their addiction from food to something else, gambling, shopping, drinking, whatever. Alcoholism is really, really high in the post-weight loss surgery community. So, yeah, and I was finding that I was able to drink a lot more for some reason. I don't know if the way my body was metabolizing alcohol had changed because of my surgery, but it was like my tolerance hadn't changed at all, and I was just right back to drinking like it was 2009. So drinking heavily, taking a break when I go to India. India changed my life. I really found this culture of yoga was so beautiful and something that I had been looking for, and it didn't have all of these, like, if you don't do this, you're bad. If you don't do this, like, you're going to hell, or there's this all-powerful being that's going to punish you for what you're doing if you're not doing things the way they want you to do them. There are guidelines that you should follow if you want to reach, like, a certain state of being, but you don't have to. Like, that's your choice, and that's your karma. You know, that's your experience. Like, you don't have to do any of these things, but there are several different things that you could practice and do with it's 8 limbs of yoga. Anyways, you guys can look into that yourself if you want to. I'm not going to get into that, but have you heard of our Lord and Savior yoga? That's kind of how I feel about that. But it opened my mind to the possibility of a whole different avenue for my spirituality and this piece of me that felt like it was missing. And so I started consuming everything I could about this different way of thinking and this different way of being, and it kind of gave me a new perspective on what this connection to something greater than me could really be. So I went back into personal development. I started working on myself and really focusing on myself and what I was doing and what I had done just the year prior to create conflict in my household, in my family, and with myself. Started seeing a therapist with my partner, and that also helped me a lot with giving me some coping tools and skills that I could use to not only work on my relationship, but things that I could apply to myself. And while I was in India, and this is something that I now use with my clients when I'm working with them, while I was in India, I met a girl, and we had a lot of really deep conversations. And I don't know if she was like an angel in disguise or something, but she's just so, the messages that she would bring to me were just so on time that there was no accident that I met her there and that we would have these conversations. But one thing that she said to me when we were discussing some things, and I was discussing some frustration with the yoga program and feeling like I wasn't good enough or meeting the expectations of our instructors, she was like, you know, you're the only one that's putting all of this on yourself, especially here with, you know, it being a yoga program. They're not expecting you to do anything. This is all you. It's honoring yourself and honoring your body and honoring your place. And you need to ask yourself why you feel like you don't deserve to be happy. Because it kind of sounds like you're self-sabotaging and that you're putting all these expectations on yourself that you can't live up to because you don't think you're worth it. And I took that and I wrote down in my journal, why do I feel like I don't deserve to be happy? And I started writing and I started crying and all of these things started coming out. Just stuff from when I was a kid and all the way up until that moment, just so much. And then I looked back at it and I looked at it just at all of the horrible things that I had written about myself. And I thought, like, why would I say all these terrible things about me? And I would never say these to anybody else I cared about. I would never say this to my partner. I would never say this to my best friend. I would never say this to my children. Why would I say these things to myself? And no wonder I haven't felt complete and whole and good and worthy. I talk to myself like trash. I treat myself like garbage. So I started going through each little line of things that I had written about myself and breaking down why I had this belief about myself, that I felt like it was okay for me to talk about myself that way. And I did that, and it took me months to get through that. I probably still have some things in my notebook that I haven't gone through or didn't go through using that list of things that I had written. But I started going through them, just breaking down where this came from, why I had this belief about myself, and why it was untrue. And if I felt like there might have been some truth to it, I would make changes so that it was no longer a truth, so that I couldn't hold it against myself. And I just kept doing that. And in January of 2019, I had this calling to start solo. And it started just as something that was going to be something that was just going to offer like yoga programs to the community. And then I kind of let it go. I left it there, and for about 6 months, I didn't do anything with it. And I just kept working on myself. And in June of 2019, I had my spiritual awakening, and it was intense. I had this massive, like, shift in my connection to universe, to source, to God, to whatever you want to call it. I thought I was going crazy. I experienced things that I had never experienced before, and I had all of this creative energy that came through me that I put into solo and into this company and into my work and this vision of what I was creating. At this point, I was still drinking in June of 2019. And let me actually rewind a little bit, because I had slowed down on my drinking at this point, which I think is what gave me the ability to open my connection and be available. So in April of 2019, I went to a friend's wedding, and I did not know anyone there except for the couple that was getting married. But I had decided that day, like I even told my husband that, we weren't married then, but my husband, before we were married, that I was going to get drunk that night. That was my plan. It was like, because I hadn't been drinking that much since I had gotten to a point where every time I was drinking, I was being really fucking mean. So I had kind of like slowed down on my drinking because I didn't feel like I couldn't control myself once I started drinking, basically. But I had decided, you know what, I've had a rough couple months. I haven't been drinking that much. Like, I'm getting shit-faced tonight, and I told him that. I was like, you stay kind of, like, not so drunk. I'm going to get really fucking drunk. And that was my goal. I knew it was going to be an open bar, so I fucking did it. And I got really, really drunk, and I really, really embarrassed myself. I did a lot of really stupid shit at a wedding with a bunch of people I didn't know. And, I found out about it the next day from the bride, who told me, like, hey, I'm not mad about anything you did, but I want to let you know what you did just in case you ever come across any of these people ever again in your life. And it was just really fucking embarrassing. Like, I'm a grown-ass adult, and I acted really, 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 really foolishly. And is not the way I wanted to present myself and not who I wanted people to know me as. Like, all of those people that met me that night are going to know me as this really drunk, ridiculous, belligerent, completely out of control person, and that's not who I am. So I had really slowed down on my drinking at this point, to the point that, like, I wasn't getting drunk anymore, I should say, when I was drinking. I would, like, have a beer, because if I ever had any more than a beer, that was never going to be just that. Like, it was never going to be just 2, I should say. Like, it was either 1 or 50. Like, there was no in between. So I had been making myself only have, like, a beer. And we ended up going to visit a friend in New Jersey, and we were drinking. And that night while I was drinking, it was July 3rd. That night while I was drinking, I drank a couple of beers, I got a little buzz, and I realized, like, and I had planned on getting drunk, but I realized I just didn't like the way it felt anymore. I didn't like feeling disconnected. I didn't like feeling not present. And I realized that I loved my life, and I loved the connections that I was building, and I loved being present, and I no longer felt like I had anything in my life or anyone in my life that I needed to escape from. I wanted to be present, and I want to be present, and I want that now. Even still, I want to be here. And that was July 3rd, 2019. So since that evening, I have not had a single drink. So my sobriety date is July 4th, 2019. And here we are now. So this podcast came about. Allie and I have always had a really close connection. We fought like crazy, and there were several times I thought our friendship was over, but for some reason we could just never, ever completely part ways. We always found our way back to each other, no matter where it was, no matter where we were, I should say. Always have celebrated her wins. She's always celebrated me. And there was a brief period in 2018 where we had like a huge situation where a third party was involved and had maliciously attempted to pit us against each other, telling both of us lies. And in the end, it ended up that we were able to talk with each other and be honest and open with each other and start letting go of some of the hurt that we had between each other. And we ended up coming out stronger for it. So that built our relationship back up. When Allie got sober, I was so proud of her, because there were so many times that I was kind of her, like I fell into the role of taking care of her. Even though I was drunk too, I was trying to make sure that she was not getting too drunk. But I'll let her tell her story. So a couple of weeks ago, we were just having one of our normal talks where we sit and chat about spirituality and different things that we've discovered about ourselves and new things that we're learning about, and and things that like other people might think are super crazy, but we think are so cool and fun. And we just love to share with each other so we can help grow each other's connections and just move forward on this path. And it's turned out that we have very much been on parallel paths towards the same destination, right? So we were having one of our normal talks and talking about social issues, and we started talking about just different things that are going on in our lives. And at the end of this call, we had been on the phone for 3 hours and didn't even like realize it, right? So that the next day, I'm thinking about all the shit we were just talking about. And a couple times over the last year, I guess the thought to like have a podcast has come up, but I just feel I have social anxiety. It's weird, but I really want connections with people. And I think Allie has such a dynamic personality that she's so great, and we just connect really well together so easily. I sent her a message and I was like, hey, like, we literally just spent like 3 hours the other day talking about so much shit. We should start a podcast. And she was like, I've totally been thinking the same thing. Let's do it. And my sober BFF was fucking born, because she is my sober BFF and I am hers. And we have so much that we've gone through that we can share and hopefully help others realize that like you are not alone in all of these things that you might be experiencing on your sobriety journey or your spiritual journey or wherever you are in life. Like, we all have so many things that happen to us, or happen for us, I should say, because everything is happening for us. But we have so many things that happen for us that are similar to other things that people are experiencing that we might feel so isolated and alone and devastated and terrible about, when instead we could totally be reaching out to other people and finding that support system and that sense of community. And I hope that we're able to build that for some other people who are going through maybe some of the same struggles or similar struggles. And even if you're not, like, I'm happy to listen to anything that you've gone through, because while I'm telling my story, I can promise you that even though you're listening to an hour of this, like, there's so much more nuance to everything that's going on in my life, that it would take me years to go through all of the years of things that I've been through. Maybe I'll write a book someday. I don't know. Put it out into the universe. We'll see what happens. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. And I hope this gave you a little bit of insight into who I am. And I look forward to continuing to build connections with all of you. And I thank you so much for listening. I'll see you soon. Bum ba dum ba dum bum 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 ba dum ba dum bum 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 ba dum ba dum bum 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 ba dum ba dum bum.